Hello and welcome once again to Red Gaming Tech for your daily dose of your latest gaming news and myself, Amata. Today is the 17th of November and I'm here to give you some more news on the PS4 and a general update on the so-called blue light of death issue, as well as the HDMI problems which have been kind of been a thorn in the Sony side ever since the PS4 was released into the wild in the US. Now, a small percentage of failures for any console is to be expected, but there does seem to be two common issues: the blue light, or sometimes the blue pulse of death, and the previously mentioned HDMI issues. Now, if you look at the Amazon reviews for this, it seems to be pretty telling, but there have been a fair few people reporting problems, but naturally you are more likely to leave a review if there's something wrong than if everything's fine. Now, at the moment, there isn't a clear fix for the issues. The only surefire solution so far seems to be sending the affected PS4 back to Sony, or possibly even exchanging it back at the store you purchased it. But of course, PS4s at the moment are a little bit like gold dust if you didn't pre-order them, so it may be tough to get hold of one from a store to exchange it for. So it may be better off giving Sony a jingle and seeing what they say. Sony have given a couple of solutions, which include holding down the power button for 7 seconds and unplugging the PS4 and then plugging it back in and switching it back on. Other suggestions that include ensuring that the hard drive of the console is seated correctly inside the machine, along with those suggesting that the firmware of the TV is actually needing to be up to date. So if you're using a smart TV or something like that, then you need to make sure that it's fully up to date. Now, despite these solution offerings from Sony, there are a few who've managed to actually resolve the issue by following these steps thus far. And as I mentioned previously a couple of times now, a few people have been suffering issues with a HDMI port. Essentially, the console turns on fine and it should be working fine, but the TV is not receiving any signal from the console itself. And this seems to derive from having bent metal inside the HDMI port, as well as an issue of incompatibility with non-Sony HDMI cables. Now, some users have managed to fix the issue by taking the PS4's Day 1 patch, putting it on a USB stick and installing it that way. So there is that issue if you have, of course, the blue light of death or blue pulse of death problems, but of course if you can't actually see to install the thing, then yeah. Well, at the bottom of the HDMI port though, as I was saying previously, the piece of metal is supposed to be straight and flush, but some users are reporting that theirs was bent at an upward angle. Now, that particular piece of metal can be bent down into position by using a pin, but the problem lays in the fact that the stray bit of metal inside the port also damages the HDMI wire that was plugged into it. Of course, it's possibly a user error, basically a person being so happy and excited to finally have their hands on a PS4 after their long wait, and they perhaps were a little bit too rough with the HDMI port. But I'd say it's still going to be a good idea for those of you who are going to be picking up your PS4s at a later date, or perhaps haven't received yours yet, so that when you do receive yours, just check the HDMI port beforehand and just be a little bit more careful. Now, the issues of cables seem to be that certain non-Sony HDMI cables refuse, for some mysterious, unbeknownst to humans reason, to work for the PS4. The cables were then tested on another device such as the Xbox 360 and will function perfectly fine, but if used on the PS4, they refuse to play ball. So there seems to be some lack of communication between certain HDMI cables that aren't Sony brand and, of course, the console itself. Now, the faulty percentage of damaged PS4's units reported by Sony, which is 0.54%, which is pretty low, but whether these numbers remain constant or the PlayStation 4 failure rate, will go higher is of course unknown right now. Now, for those PlayStation 4 owners whose system glows blue but doesn't show white, it's pretty unclear now what the fix actually is, other than calling Sony. Remember, the blue light of death has been named this because of the Microsoft and Xbox 360 failure rate. It turned out that the eventual failure rate of the X360 turned out to be 56%. So let's hope we don't have another repeat of that. So at the moment it seems pretty unclear as to what's causing the issues for this small percentage of people. Now 0.4% is not exactly what I call high, but given the amount of people playing consoles, or playing the console, excuse me, that does equal, unfortunately, a fair few people who may have received a dud console. Now, if you take the care to check the HDMI port, you may be able to avoid that issue, but of course, if you have the so-called blue light of death, there's not really much you can do, unfortunately, other than trying Sony's suggestions, which, as I said, have only worked for a couple of people. Most people have not found them particularly helpful. So let's hope that Sony gets an official fix for this soon. As I said previously, these kind of problems are to be expected with any console launch, but let's just hope the failure rate does not go higher. I don't think anyone wants to see a repeat of the last generation with lots of people experiencing problems with their brand new console. As well, every Xbox 360 owner I know, apart from maybe one, suffered that problem, including myself, and it was very frustrating. And what kind of made me rage at the time is that it just happened just before Assassin's Creed came out, and that was a game I'd wanted to play for a long time, and basically it left me waiting for a good few weeks to get it sorted out before I could actually play the game, which kind of annoyed me to no end. So let's just cross our fingers and hope that Sony finds a fix for these issues soon, or whatever manufacturing issue that is causing them ceases to be a factor after the initial launch run. So there you have it, just sort of a recap and update on what's going on with the defective consoles for the PS4. But yeah, that is me done for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.